I'd like to welcome you to my part of the exhibition Bridges at the Colonica Villa Il Palmerino here in Florence. My work has a general title, The Female Gaze Meets the Oltrarno Gaze, and I've been looking at the work of 4 historic female artists connected with Florence, and the idea is that creating a bridge between women artists of the present with artists of the past, whose work is in Florentine collections. And there are 4 artists: Artemisia Gentileschi, whose work I've been inspired by for these works, Elisabeth Vigée Le Brun here, Käthe Kollwitz, German artist here, and Elisabeth Chaplin, French artist who then moved to San Domenico near Palmerino, and who spent the last years of her life here and knew the person who owned the house here. So it's quite a nice historical connection. I prepared these works in my studio in Brighton, painting on both sides of sheets of Fabriano paper, but it's only here in Florence that they've become the cylinders that you see here, where visitors can peer in and discover the woman inside. Artemisia Gentileschi, 16th century artist, is known for her paintings, very strong paintings of women in very forceful positions. And I worked with my model and collaborator Frankie to recreate our own versions of the Artemisia inspired paintings. Here I've used the colours that Artemisia uses, the scarlet, crimson, golden colours, and she's in a position that's actually inspired by one of her paintings, but we created our own pose. When I painted this watercolour, the paint drips, and I actually thought I was going to try and erase these marks here, but then I thought of the painting as crying, as having tears, and I quite liked the idea because on the outer part of the painting I've written the words "Non piangere Artemisia, don't cry, le lacrime si trasformano in colori." That means, don't cry, Artemisia, don't cry. Tears are turned into colours. And these words are actually, they're my words, but they also refer to a writer called Anna Banti, who wrote a book about Artemisia, which has its own particularly poignant story and is an inspiration about what women can do and what art can do to not just inspire people, but to energize and motivate people. Anna Banti wrote a book about the artist Artemisia during the war in Florence, the Second World War, but the manuscript was lost and destroyed in the bombing of Florence as the Germans left the city. And the book that she eventually wrote starts with her standing above Florence in Boboli Gardens, and she's looking down on the city and at Borgo San Jacopo, towards Borgo San Jacopo in the Oltrarno area, where her house was bombed and the manuscript that she'd been working on for 4 years was lost. And she starts her new book with the words "Non piangere, don't cry." And what she actually wrote was, she didn't actually then go on to say Artemisia or herself. She wrote a book that weaves her own life in with Artemisia's. And so you don't know whether she's crying for Artemisia, the artist, who many of us know had quite a violent start to her artistic career. She was raped and then had to stand trial, tested as to whether she was being truthful or not by being tortured. So quite a violent start for a young woman aged about 20. And so the non pianger, as I say, is this idea taken from Anna Banti's book, but then I actually wrote Le lacrime si trasformano in colori. Tears are transformed into colours. And this happens not just my idea of Artemisia, but as you see there's the dripping paint. It's both actually a transformation, but also a metaphor for what all artists do, whether they're writers or painters, in that they transform whatever's happened to them in their lives into something else. Here, this is based on another Artemisia painting of the Mary Magdalene in ecstasy, but with Frankie in the studio, we took parts of the pose, but it was impossible to have her head really leaning back like this. I think we would have had to cut the head off and place it behind her. So Frankie is actually in a much more dreamlike pose, and in fact I call it divine inspiration, thinking more about an artist dreaming. And again I've done an abstract painting on the exterior, and what becomes the exterior, and I've written in gold, oil pastel, terror and magnificence, flesh and fabric, thinking very much about what I see in Artemisia's paintings, where she's a woman painting strong women, very often performing violent acts. But what interested me also is her attitude to dress, and makes me think about how we put clothes on and take them off. With Frankie, as we created some of these poses for the work that I was preparing in the exhibition, we were trying out clothes, pieces of fabric close to our skin, buttoning and unbuttoning, and it made me think that that's what Artemisia was doing. She was probably trying on the clothes, whether it was Judith or Cleopatra or Lucrezia, whoever it was, she was a woman trying in different lights to see what would work on her skin and in the general composition. Here I have the French artist Elisabeth Vigée Le Brun, based on the painting which is in the Uffizi collection, commissioned by the Uffizi for their famous self-portrait collection, which includes Rembrandt, Van Dyck, Andrea del Sarto, and it's always interested me, this portrait, because she looks like a young girl without a care in the world, but in fact when she painted this, it was 1790, she's 36 years old, and she's just fled the Paris of the Revolution with her small daughter and very little money. And so I was interested in her decision to present herself like this. It was like her calling card, if you like. The portrait was very much admired and earned her the epithet Madame Rubens and Madame Van Dyck. The French writer Simone de Beauvoir, talking about female creativity, refers to Vigée Le Brun in rather a sort of condescending way, calling her narcissistic and criticizing what she calls her souriante maternité, her smiling maternity. Here, on this side of the work, I've actually put in various texts, but also this is a black and white copy of one of the paintings, but taken from the cover of Vigée Le Brun's memoirs, which she wrote in her 80s. Simone de Beauvoir looked at some of these smiling images of herself, the pretty woman who Vigée Le Brun obviously was, and images of her as a mother. And she was kind of dismissive and condescending, as I said, about it. But she didn't actually think in a historical way about what it meant to be a woman artist fleeing Paris when friends and patrons were imprisoned and executed, and what courage it took for Vigée Le Brun even to paint what she did. In this painting, where Vigée is showing herself at her best as a young woman, appealing to the others, she's actually in the act of painting her patroness Marie Antoinette, who at that time was actually imprisoned and due to be executed, as we all know. This here is the first, is again from the cover of another copy of the memoirs that Vigée Le Brun wrote in her 80s. And it shows Marie Antoinette with the rose. It's called La Reine à la Rose, the Queen with the Rose. And it's one of many paintings that she did of the Queen, obviously before the Revolution. So I've actually called this painting La Femme derrière le sourire, the woman behind the smile, because that's what I'm interested in. It's a woman who, as she wrote about herself in her 80s, that painting and life were one and the same thing for her. And here I've written of some of the things that she wrote about herself. She said the day that her daughter was born, she was busy in the studio working between labour pains, and when her best friend, Madame de Verdun, came to see her and said, "Have you got everything that's necessary for the birth?" She replied, "I don't know. What do you mean about necessary?" And her friend said, "Well, tu es un vrai garçon, you're really a real tomboy," and said, "You're going to be giving birth this evening." And Vigée Le Brun's reply was, no, I can't possibly do that. I've got a sitting tomorrow. And something like that, and the way she describes herself just feels so contemporary. It just makes you feel that it makes me feel a bond with someone who, from the outside appearance, belongs to a much more formal world, and yet it could be someone today painting and really involved in their work, a modern woman. So here I have Käthe Kollwitz. This was in fact the first of the works that I worked on because it felt very relevant. Käthe Kollwitz, the German artist, who sort of straddled the 19th and 20th centuries. This is based on a woodcut that's in the Uffizi collection, a self-portrait woodcut, done in 1924. Very different from the Artemisias and the Vigée Le Brun. Käthe Kollwitz lost her son in the First World War, and she was a pacifist. The Nazis, obviously very much identified with working people, and was condemned by the Nazis, lost her job at the Académie because of her thoughts and her words. Her poster of the 1924, so nearly 100 years ago, has the words "Ni vie de Krieg," which I've put in big red letters on the outside of this, because "Nie wieder Krieg" in German means no more war. And when I started working on this, of course, we had a war, the outbreak of war in Europe. And so I wrote the same words in various languages: mai più guerra, never again war, jamais plus guerre, no mas Spanish, the German, and then here I have Ukrainian, Russian, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Arabic, Greek. Because whichever language we have, we should be brothers and sisters under the skin. And those words from 100 years ago are as important for us today. And here with Käthe, I've put a kind of apocalyptic landscape. So that's that work. She actually came to Florence as the recipient of the Villa Romana Prize in 1907. So it was quite interesting that she's obviously walked through these same streets. It's not just her artwork that has come here. This painting, this is the interior, has the figure of, which based on Mary Magdalene, the Artemisia painting, but I call it my Red Mary because it's the colours are obviously these glowing reds and pinks, and it's passion basically. It's a woman in the throes of whatever one would like to think of as passion. On the outside of this, I've actually done a painting based on a painting that I did many years ago, looking down on Florence from a villa in Bellosguardo. It was a villa actually which the poets Elizabeth and Robert and Elizabeth Barrett Browning had stayed in. it was the city of Florence veiled in green mists as I saw it in the very early hours of the morning before the sun rose. And I wrote these words, which I'm just going to read out, thinking about both the history of Florence and what it hides, and of Artemisia's depictions of women in acts of violence. What lies between the folds of the sleeping city? Flesh and fabric, cloak and dagger, fact and fiction, plot and passion, myth and metamorphosis. So again, the idea is that you can move around this work and peer into it. Here I have my Oltrarno memories. This was intended to be a column, and in fact there's a self-portrait which you can see reflected in that mirror there. Quite a clever way of... it's not my doing. Federica, who helped to curate this part of the exhibition, had the idea of placing a mirror so that you could actually see the other side. I decided to display this side in full rather than as part of a cylinder, because it actually brings this whole series of works. I sort of come full circle, both with my own connection to Florence and the Oltrarno Gaze, which is the general title for a series of exhibitions and events that have been taking place over the last few months in Florence. Oltrarno is the other side of the river. The other side of the river from here is like the left bank of Florence. And it's the area of Florence that I first came to when I came after I'd finished my A-levels in England. I came to Florence before going to university. And my memories came back when I saw this painting. This is the fourth artist that I'm relating to, Elisabeth Chaplin, who was born in Fontainebleau in France, but came and spent most of her life in and near Florence. Her paintings are in the Pitti Palace, and she actually lived in San Domenico, very close to Villa Il Palmerino here, and was friends with Federica's grandmother, so she would have known this place, which is rather nice. But what really attracted me to this painting was the blue, because it's the blue of my first Oltrarno memories. As I walked home from a day of classes at the British Institute, which is actually one of the organisers of these exhibitions, the British Institute of Florence, where I was studying Italian and the history of Italian Renaissance art, I would walk home and go past this church, and there was a particular vibrant blue above the sky that I called Madonna blue, and that's what those memories are what I was taken back to by seeing this painting, and I wanted to recreate it. So I did a self-portrait of myself, in fact in a sketchbook, so this is a photocopy of it, of myself in a red kimono. This painting is called Self-Portrait with a Red Shawl. I had a red kimono, and I tried to find that blue. So as you see, I've got different blues here. I've put in Italian, cercando il blu della memoria, searching for the blue of memory. And here I've painted this swirling blue, which could be sky, it could be ocean. And the Church of Santo Spirito is there in the centre. It's the heart of this area of Florence. And this window, looking through the window at the rooftops of the Santo Spirito area, is the house of my oldest friend, and the house which became my home from home in Florence. On the other side, as I say, there's a self-portrait, which you can see. And this is hung with the ribbons that I have in my studio, which I use to tie up these cylinders, these paper cylinders, and which I also use to make me think about colours and what colours I want to use in a painting. Anyway, they actually came in useful when we decided to hang this painting in that way. When Federica found a mirror, and it wasn't a mirror, it was actually a cabinet, to reflect this side of the painting, she thought that I should actually put something inside it, and so I did a last-minute work based on Artemisia's heroines. That's a Cleopatra, and that's Judith beheading Holofernes. And I'm not going to unpin it here now, but on the outer side, or on the reverse, there is the green veiled city, which you saw here, which I've also got on one of my cards. I don't know if you can see that closely, and where the text is actually written in Italian. So that kind of brings me full circle, because here I am now, probably 50 years on or so, from where this story started. And thank you very much for listening to me.